Hello there. It's been a while since I did a podcast, and I don't even know if this would qualify as a podcast. But I came across a podcast that I was listening to a couple weeks ago. It's somebody I have never listened to his podcast before. His name is Ari Shafir, and I know he's a good friend of Joe Rogan. And it was funny because I was listening to this podcast that he had done with Milo Yiannopoulos, I think is his last name. Anyway, so you may have remembered Milo, for any of you that follow U.S. politics. Hi, Samson. For some very, he's just a very colorful character in a lot of ways. Anyway, he and Ari are both self-acknowledged trolls, which is kind of a term used nowadays for professional hater or professional shit stirrer, okay, online. And listening to these two talk and some of the conversation, just like if you listen to Joe Rogan, sometimes for some of us it's a little bit cringy because it's just so vulgar and it's just like, oh, I don't want to listen to this part. But I like the rest of the conversation. Anyway, so there's a bit of that in it. But for anybody that hears about trolling, or you see trolling online if you're on Twitter, I don't like Twitter because of that reason, and just inauthentic conversations. And just this, anyway, it was fascinating. Hearing two trolls talk about trolling and brag about trolling and what they've done, and 4chan, I think is what it's called. Anyway, it was fascinating. Just in terms of what the psychology behind it, and that there are actually people out there that they'll just say anything to get under someone's skin. That's not my nature. So I just can't understand it, but it's become such a part of our culture. But the other part, that if that part doesn't interest you, the part that may interest you is that they actually do things like, especially Milo will do things to intentionally get fake news and some fake meme started on and reported on by like CNN. They love to mess with like CNN, MSNBC, and that was just like, oh my God. I mean, this is how bad it's gotten. Anyway, I found it fascinating. There is parts of it that are cringy, listening to it. But for anyone that's very curious about this, I'll post a link to that on my website. So just look for Jill Renee Feeler, exploring troll behavior. That's what I'll call it. I should write that down so I don't forget. So there's that podcast I'll link to. And then there's another podcast I'll listen to, which is Sam Harris talking with this woman that is, I think she's a researcher or maybe even a journalist. Anyway, she did some research on, I think she is an actual researcher. She did some research on the Russian, bots, Russian, actual humans from Russia that will work in Florida or work in Russia, and they create these fake Facebook groups and Facebook accounts, and they start these memes. They start this movement, and they get two groups together, a white supremacist group and a Black Lives Matter group. They'll actually organize community events in communities they're not even at. And they'll make friends posing as a certain fake identity online, and they'll try to coordinate two different groups that are polar opposites to have rallies or whatever, on the same block on the same day. That doesn't happen by accident, people. Okay? And it's not sincere people on either side that are doing it. They're just literally stirring the pot. They're literally shit stirrers. I'd be like, what? Anyway, so listening to that podcast was fascinating. I listened to that probably a year ago. So I have felt so much more informed now that I know this side of it. When I see something that is obvious troll behavior, and when I see media going, oh, they're making the white supremacist symbol, the upside down okay symbol, Milo explains that. And it's just or they're just messing with you. I mean, it's just I don't know. It's a psychology that I think is just so foreign to most of us. So having some awareness of it, I think, sort of allows us to be more calm, more informed, and maybe more centered in our own heart space, so that we can see troll behavior more obviously when it does arise or when we do come across it. And maybe we can be a bit more savvy when there is shit stirring, kind of pot stirring sort of makings happening, because it happens a lot in social media. And with the election coming up, and the presidential election coming up in the US, I just feel like we're going to see another flavor, another some sort of iteration of that this year. And I don't know what that's going to be. Or do I? Do I? I think they could still use the same tricks they used in, I mean, they meaning groups that are actually funding and funded to create controversy and pretending to be on a certain side of things just to get under the skin and, rile the nerves up of those on the other side. Yeah, it's really interesting. Anyway, so I feel like that could go on again just like it did in 2016 in this election cycle. What else do I want to share here from me? This Bloomberg thing is really interesting. Bloomberg coming online. I do... Oh, yeah. Okay. So, Bernie Sanders. I am one of my degrees is in economics. I think you guys know that about me. So it's not because of that, but I tend to be more of a free market, laissez-faire. Let's allow for those that want to be super dedicated to something and could make a lot of money at it. Let's let them do that. And, let's tax them fairly, but not to thwart their entrepreneurial spirit and that kind of thing. I'm not a socialist. I'm not I just tend to like free markets, but the crony capitalism that we now have in the US that's not free market. That's a very rigged market. The idea that, there's another movie. I'll post it. It's a movie in this case. I'll put a link to. I think it's called The Big Short. And that is I'll post that too. Gosh, there's a lot to post here, but there's a lot to learn, right? Maybe if you don't know. The banking crisis that we saw, that it's a heartbreaking movie, and it's humorous, but also very dramatic, and very informative about what actually happened with the mortgage loan crisis. And from what I understand, there's a similar sort of bubble developing in the auto loan space. Anyway, so the other link I'll post to is Matt Taibbi being interviewed by Joe Rogan, and Matt explains really well kind of what happened in the mortgage loan crisis and the commoditization of loans, which is basically taking a bunch of loans, consumer loans mainly in this case, residential home loans, and then packaging them up and selling that as a commodity. And it's just really interesting. Anyway, so there's maybe some things to be learned there, but I'm going off topic again. I apologize. Bernie. Okay, so I'm listening to Matt Taibbi's podcast, Useful Idiots, which I actually enjoy. They tend to be, he and the other host are very staunch and admitted Bernie fans, so they're biased in that way. They own their bias towards loving Bernie, and they're equally critical, I think, of the Republicans, and equally critical of the Democrats. And I love that sort of we can see that neither one of them are angels and neither one of them are demons. Anyway, so they interviewed somebody that is from the Bernie Sanders campaign, I believe, and I think a fellow senator, maybe he's a congressman. Anyway, listening to this guy talk about Bernie and how he would pay for some of the programs actually helped me see some really interesting things that I had not seen before. And I do wonder, or it's starting to kind of fit into place here, that Bernie is the establishment, the corporate establishment, is just as terrified of Bernie as the media is, and I think in some ways maybe corporate, I don't know. They feel like they can't control Trump. I would say Trump is very controlled though. I don't think he's promised it. He certainly didn't drain the swamp, in my opinion. I think he sucked up the swamp and picked out people that were from the swamp and put him on his administration. Anyway, so Bernie, I'm just seeing another side to him from that interview, which is surprising to me because I think I bought into the sort of propaganda about him as, oh, he's such a socialist, and he's gonna ruin the economy and the stock market's gonna tank and blah, blah, blah. And I bought into that, but now that I see that if he's successful at decreasing the defense budget, he could decrease the defense budget to back to where it was, back to where it was when Obama was in office. And then he would have he wouldn't have, but the Pentagon and so forth, the military industrial complex, if they did that, would have less money to start making trouble in the rest of the world. And I do agree with Bernie and Tulsi Gabbard on this. We need to get out of other people's business, and it does not go well. And I just don't buy into these justifications for these foreign engagements that the U.S. has been involved in since 92 consistently, most of my adult life. Anyway, so I do trust that Bernie or Tulsi, but I think Bernie's much more likely, obviously, numbers wise, to get elected than Tulsi. But anyway, so I'm like, okay, so if I supported Bernie personally, would that mean that I'm for, some of the other social programs? That it's not that I don't want everyone to go to college. I just believe that everyone going to college could actually economically cause other problems. And I think that some people want to go to college to get better jobs, but I don't think that would happen. My intuition and my economics, education and degree tells me that if we had a much higher percentage of the U.S. population having college degrees, we would have more baristas and truck drivers and shopkeepers that have college degrees that they're not putting to use, that are not necessary. Okay, so I think sometimes there's these really sort of pitchy little titles like, well, college, free college education. And people automatically think, oh, that means everybody's going to have high paying jobs. No, it doesn't. It means we're going to have, I think, an overeducated workforce because not all jobs require a college degree. And there's actually already some creep in that area where college degrees are requested, but it's only as some sort of a filtering tool to try to narrow the candidates for some of these jobs, okay? The other side of that, the other sort of pitchy sort of thing that we all hear for is, well, we need free healthcare. Well, healthcare doesn't mean health. I know, these are hard topics, you guys, right? Because, of course, who doesn't? I think both sides would agree we want a healthy population. We want health. We want a healthy citizenry. We want a healthy nation. We want a healthy world. But it's very possible that whole healthcare for all has been funded and benefits the present healthcare industry, which, has its positives, but it also has its negatives. It's very pharmaceutical dependent, and I have health care, and I've had some health problems in the last year. So I just know a lot of people that have health care and that are not healthy. So I think there's better ways to health than health care. Now, that's easy for me to say because I have health care, and I totally admit that. But I just think we need to be a bit more cognizant of the fact that sometimes, these sort of blanket statements of, yes, if everybody had health care, then I think we make some really, really generalized, idealistic assumptions about what that would mean. And I think we would be very sorely mistaken, and it would be sad because there's so many other things that lead to health, mainly nutrition, making good choices related to food and walking, at least 5,000 steps a day and ideally 10. And there's so many other things that we don't need the government involved in necessarily. Well, maybe we do. Anyway, I know there's a lot of people that go, Jill, you don't know that in some, economic circumstances, they can't afford, organic broccoli. Yes, actually, I do know that. I do know that. But I'm just saying this is a big problem. And having the government just come in and he'll fix it all, that doesn't work. The other part, because it can't be done, if it were easily fixable, it would have been fixed by now. Okay? The other part that I found really interesting, and this was in a Jimmy Dore interview he was on, I think it was Dave Rubin, And he made a really good point about the U.S. presidential debates. He said they ask these questions in the debates in January as if these people are going to be kings and queens. Well, what will you do if you're elected? As if, when I'm king, I can do this, this, and this. And that isn't even the right question to ask. It doesn't matter what they wish they could do. It matters what legislation they can get through, unless they're going to use the executive orders. And therein we get to the heart of the leader and where their heart is related to military involvement and the use of our military and some other things. So that's where I do kind of like the idea. And I'm kind of shocking myself in this regard. That what if somebody like Bernie is in there, or somebody that is not just saying they're against military conflict, but they've actually voted that way before consistently. And I think that he has a good track record on that. But I mean, Trump definitely has not, he has not done what he said he would do. Anyway, so I know it's tricky out there, you guys. And sorry, this has been a bit all over the place, but there's just a lot of different sort of things I've learned along the way. And I'm sort of like, oh, I wonder if it would help you to know this as well. And that doesn't mean I'm like, oh, I've got it all figured out. But I feel closer to truth than I did before. And I love to feel that way. And maybe you like to feel that way too. And you may enjoy these resources. Okay. All right. I love you guys. It's going to be an interesting year, 2020. It's going to be so interesting. I am very excited to see what happens. Hopefully it goes well. Right? But take care of yourselves out there. Okay. I love you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.